may signify.
Welcome to this explainer. Close your eyes for just a second and picture a pitch-black, lonely country road. There's this heavy chill in the air, the exact kind that makes you want to immediately lock your doors and just keep driving. Well, today we're diving into a really chilling narrative titled Speak of the Devil. We're going to break down exactly what happens when pure, unwavering religious devotion just absolutely collides with a mysterious, overwhelming darkness. It's a classic tale of suspense, sure, but more importantly, it gives us this fascinating look at a huge recurring theme in folklore: why pure faith so often finds itself face-to-face with mysterious, malevolent forces. So get ready, because we are unpacking the anatomy of a truly terrifying encounter.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Our story kicks off with this incredibly unsettling observation. Usually, no one stops for hitchhikers this late at night. This line gets dropped early on by the mysterious stranger in our story, and honestly, it is an absolute masterclass in establishing dread before we even really know who the characters are. I mean, why would someone say this? It immediately highlights the sheer vulnerability of the entire situation. It's kind of the subtle nod by the entity that the normal rules of safety have just been completely thrown out the window. So, throughout this explainer, we're going to trace the exact steps that led to this deeply unsettling conversation and see how a really simple act of charity becomes an outright invitation to ultimate evil.
Section 1. Setting the midnight scene.
So every great suspense narrative relies heavily on isolation, right? And this story paints that perfectly. We're introduced to this solitary figure, a nun. She's deeply rooted in her beliefs, yet entirely physically isolated in the dark. To really understand why she becomes a target, let's trace the exact timeline of events that push her toward a terrible mistake. First, moments prior to the encounter, the nun is driving down this lonely road. She's worried about how late it is, so what does she do? She kisses the rosary beads around her neck and says a prayer. She is actively seeking spiritual protection in the face of all this physical darkness. Then, step 2, she glances at the clock and it strikes exactly 12 o'clock, midnight, the classic witching hour in folklore. And finally, step 3, literally moments after reaffirming her faith and noting the ominous time, she looks back at the road and spots a tall, dark figure standing there with his thumb sticking out. The pacing here is absolutely critical. Her act of faith is immediately, almost magnetically, followed by the appearance of the unknown.
Section 2. Enter the mysterious stranger.
Now, what's really interesting here is that, according to the story, the nun was actually about to just drive right past him. And honestly, that would have been the safe, logical choice. But seeking some company in that oppressive dark, she makes a faithful decision and actually pulls over. It's a profound moment of human vulnerability, just completely masked as charity. She opens the door to her sanctuary, her car, and essentially invites the darkness right inside. Let's look at the stark contrast between these two figures who are now sharing a very small, confined space. On one side, we have the nun. Her motivations are totally pure. She's heading to midnight mass, she's openly sharing her life and her deep faith, and she's wearing her rosary as this tangible shield of devotion. On the flip side, we have the hitchhiker. He's described as very tall and incredibly thin, with a pale white face, cloaked in this huge overcoat and a big black hat. And his reaction to her earnest devotion? He simply listens and just occasionally laughs at her faith. It's a chilling duality. You literally have absolute purity and devotion sitting mere inches away from mockery, secrecy, and darkness.
Section 3. Colliding faith and darkness.
As they keep traveling together down the road, the tension quietly, slowly escalates. She thinks she's perfectly safe. She's performing a good deed on her way to a holy place. But this brings us right back to our core focus today. Why does faith seem to attract these mysterious forces? In this narrative, her faith doesn't repel the entity at all. Rather, it actually seems to amuse him. It becomes this twisted psychological game grounding the supernatural terror in very real human vulnerability and the super dangerous limits of assumed safety. And then, just as the church finally comes into view, a literal deacon of sanctuary, the stranger abruptly stops the journey. He says, "No, I'll be good right here. I'll walk. Actually, I have someone coming for me, right near this spot." The nun, who's seemingly enjoying his company, even offers to take him further, but he refuses. And listen, this isn't just a polite decline of a ride. This is a stark, deeply unsettling rejection of the holy sanctuary up ahead. The entity cannot, or simply will not, approach the church. The very destination the nun assumed would bring them both safety is exactly what the hitchhiker is actively avoiding.
Section 4. The terrifying clues. Okay, this is the exact moment the narrative shifts from just an eerie, uncomfortable ride into downright visceral terror. The facade completely drops. The stranger steps out into the night, and the suspense just builds incredibly fast as the sinister truth is finally revealed. Step 1. As he leaves, he thanks her for the ride and specifically calls her Clarisse. The chilling realization hits her like a ton of bricks. She never told him her name. The entity possesses impossible supernatural knowledge. Step 2. Driven by sheer panic, she jumps out of her car, looks down at the dirt tracks he left, and just screams. Because where his human footprints should be, there are actual hoof prints stamped into the earth. Step 3. She scrambles frantically back in, drives like crazy into Busby, gets to the church, and tells the priest everything. When they go out to check her car, they discover a devil's sign left behind right in her back seat. Each clue is just a heavier hammer blow, confirming that she didn't just pick up a strange man on the road, she literally picked up the devil himself.
Section 5. A tragic conclusion.
So, the clues have been laid out. She made it to the church in Busby. She found the priest. Traditionally, you'd think the story ends right here, right? With our protagonist safe and sound within the protective bounds of her sanctuary after a terrifying brush with ultimate evil. But this narrative does not offer a comforting resolution. Instead, it delivers a deeply chilling, somber aftermath. The next morning, she was found dead in her car, right back at the exact spot where she had dropped the hitchhiker off. It is a massive, absolutely devastating impact. She didn't survive the night safely at the church. Somehow, inexplicably, she ended up right back out there on that lonely country road. Her kindness, her charity, her deeply held faith, and her rosary, literally none of it shielded her from the fatal consequence of that one fateful decision to pull over.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of this entire explainer, a question that really lingers long after the story ends. Did her faith protect her, or did it actually make her a target for the dark? It forces us to confront why these specific narratives even exist in the first place. Was the entity drawn to her devotion specifically to mock it, test it, and ultimately destroy it? It is a deeply unsettling thought that challenges the very concept of having spiritual armor. So, as you reflect on those hoofprints in the dirt and that devil's sign in the back seat, ask yourself, when pure faith meets the absolute unknown on a dark road at midnight, who is really in control? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.
All right, let's dive right in. Welcome to today's explainer, where we're going to do something a little bit different, but honestly incredibly fascinating. Have you ever wondered why a scary story actually works? Like, what is the actual architecture of a good scare? I mean, we all had that one dark closet we sprinted past as kids, right? Well, today we are going to perform a chronological autopsy on a brilliant piece of micro-horror, just to uncover its mechanics. We'll be breaking down a famous Japanese ghost tale called Bedroom Closet, looking at exactly how it builds tension, manipulates our expectations, and delivers a lasting chill. So this actually originates as a spooky ghost tale from Japan, a culture with a super rich, deeply unsettling tradition of supernatural folklore. But you know what makes this specific story so effective? It isn't just the cultural tone. It's the incredible efficiency of its narrative. In literally just a few short paragraphs, it manages to tap into these primal, universal fears. So how exactly does it do it? Let's take a look at the very first step the author takes to pull us in. Section 1, the innocent setup, normalcy before terror. Because any true master of horror is going to tell you that terror doesn't actually start with a monster. It starts with absolute safety. Notice how systematically this story isolates our protagonist. First, the parents leave, instantly removing that ultimate safety net. Then, the protagonist is suddenly burdened with protecting their little brother. And then, they actually decide to play hide and seek, willingly closing their eyes and completely giving up their situational awareness. In mere moments, they are isolated, burdened, and utterly vulnerable. Moving on to Section 2, a game of suspense, building the tension. You know, hide and seek is literally the perfect engine for suspense. It naturally leads our protagonists to a terrifying focal point, the parents' dark bedroom closet, with its door just slightly ajar. "I know you're in there," they shout. Notice that tone? It's completely triumphant. They think they're the predator finding the prey, completely unaware that the roles are about to violently reverse.
So the closet is crammed full of clothes, which creates this heavy visual barrier. The protagonist boldly thrusts their hand into the dark, and instantly, another hand reaches out and grabs their wrist. In a fraction of a second, that illusion of control shatters, and this innocent childhood game becomes a literal, physical trap.
Section 3, the tactile scare, visceral horror. And just like that, the story shifts from atmospheric suspense right into visceral, physical horror through a single touch. But human psychology is kind of fascinating here. When we're faced with the impossible, our brains desperately try to rationalize it. "Come on, I found you! Come out of there!" Even though they've been grabbed in the pitch dark, the protagonist stubbornly tries to force reality back into the rules of hide and seek. They cry out, pulling hard, fighting to maintain that mundane reality we just talked about in the setup. But reality absolutely refuses to conform. The entity remains hidden behind those cramped clothes, completely silent and totally unyielding. And honestly, the silence is what really escalates the unease here. The protagonist's rationalization crumbles as they realize this isn't some playful trick. They actually start wondering what on earth is wrong with their brother. Let's actually just pause right here for a second. Imagine you're in that physical space. You are standing in your parents' quiet bedroom. Your arm is plunged into a dark, crammed closet. Something has an incredibly tight grip on your wrist. It won't let go and it won't make a sound. The tension is palpable. If it's not a playful younger brother playing a trick, then who is holding her wrist? Section 4. The subversive twist. Psychological horror. And this brings us to what I think is a brilliant pivot point, where physical terror transforms into pure psychological horror. The protagonist hears a voice right behind them. What are you doing? It's the little brother, standing completely safely in the doorway. It's an auditory jump scare that totally shatters the reality of their present moment. I mean, just think about this horrifying realization for a second. On one hand, standing safely in the light is the brother they thought they were pulling from the closet. On the other hand, hidden away in the dark is the terrifying unknown they are currently physically tethered to, a pale, white hand with an icy grip. The protagonist's assumption is violently ripped away, leaving them anchored to an unseen, completely supernatural threat. Finally, Section 5, the lingering unknown, the frantic climax. When that realization hits, the reaction is purely primal. The protagonist screams, overcome by total panic, desperately struggling to shake free. The brother rushes over, and through their combined, frantic effort, they finally manage to squirm out of the clutches of that pale hand. It's this massive burst of kinetic energy, entirely focused on survival and escape. But here's the thing. The fear doesn't just stop once that grip is broken. In seconds, they squirm free. Moments later, they are running, screaming from the room. Immediately after that, they rush completely out of the house, ultimately waiting out in the street, trembling together until their parents return. This entire sequence illustrates the total destruction of their safe haven. The house no longer belongs to them. It belongs to whatever is in that closet. So finally, we reach the procedural, supposed return to safety. The parents, the ultimate authority figures, finally get home. The terrified children explain what happened, prompting the adults to go upstairs and search the closet. This is supposed to be the moment where logic is restored, right? Where the parents turn on the lights to prove for sure that there are no monsters. But they find absolutely nothing, just a bunch of old clothes. And you know what? This is exactly why the story is an absolute masterclass in horror. If the parents had found a prowler, well, then it's a crime story. If they found a demon, the unknown is quantified. By leaving nothing, the story offers zero closure. It proves that we are vulnerable even in the very center of our own homes. So the next time you go to grab a coat in the dark, how sure are you about what's actually waiting on the other side? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope you walk away with a deeper appreciation for the structured craft behind a truly great scare. See you next time. All right, welcome back to another explainer. You might want to go ahead and lower the lights, turn up the volume, and just settle in for this one, because today we are dissecting a truly chilling first-person account. We're looking at the anatomy of an urban legend, specifically a horrifying encounter with an entity known only as the Screaming Woman. Now, this isn't just your standard scary story. It's actually a fascinating look at our deepest survival instincts, the uncanny valley, and how incredibly fast a totally mundane situation can spiral into absolute paralyzing terror. I'm going to guide you through this macabre experience step by step, analyzing the very structure of fear exactly as it was recorded by the survivor. Where the eyes would have been were merely dark sockets, and her alabaster skin was stained with blood. Just let that gruesome image sit with you for a second. That is the terrifying reality our narrator actually found themselves face to face with. But how did they even get to this blood-stained visage? How does a perfectly normal day devolve into a literal nightmare? Well, to understand the sheer panic of this encounter, we need to jump back to the beginning of the text and trace the exact steps that led to this horrific confrontation. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. A seemingly normal walk and the shrinking distance. So, picture this. Our narrator is simply making their way home from school one day. Up ahead, they notice a woman with long, raven hair flowing out behind her as she walks. I mean, nothing supernatural about that, right? But the spatial dynamics quickly start to shift. Initially, she's about 10 feet in front of the narrator. When they're about 4 blocks from home, this false sense of security sets in. The narrator naturally picks up the pace, and suddenly that 10-foot gap completely vanishes. She is now a mere 5 feet away. The physical space between safety and the unknown is collapsing rapidly. Which brings us to Section 2, the broken figure ahead and a painful gait. As that distance closes, right, you've got these primal survival instincts violently clashing with basic logic. The narrator observes this bizarre, agonizing juxtaposition in the woman ahead of them. Her pace is sluggish, like slow enough to easily pass if they wanted to, and yet she's horribly bent over, moving as though she's literally walking barefoot on broken glass. Every single instinct is screaming at the narrator to run in the exact opposite direction, but the mind gets paralyzed. You're seeing a threat that's moving too slowly to be in immediate physical danger, sure, but she's moving in this visceral, unnatural way that just triggers absolute dread.
Moving right along to Section 3, face to disfigured face and the turn.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer panic of the moment. The distance has completely closed. The survival instincts? Ignored. And then, without any warning whatsoever, she stops. This horrid, grating noise fills the air as she turns around. Really focus on that auditory element, that bone-chilling sound before the visual nightmare is fully revealed. First, there are no eyes, merely dark, empty sockets set in alabaster skin that is completely purpled with bruising. Gnarled arms are twisted up against her body, looking as though they had literally never been used. And beneath a pale, flowing skirt, malnourished legs. Every single detail is this terrifying assault on the senses, painting a picture of an entity that honestly shouldn't even be able to stand. But you know what really grounds this supernatural terror in reality? It's the gritty, physical details of her clothes. The text explicitly notes her flowing clothes were once white, but now they are heavily stained with blood, grass, and grime. Her raven hair is just matted with that exact same foul mixture. We aren't talking about the ethereal, glowing robes of a ghost here. This is the visceral, filthy aftermath of something incredibly violent and earthly. It drags the true horror right into the physical space of the narrator.
Let's get into Section 4, the attack and aftermath, and the screech. Here is where the real nightmare begins. Her thin lips part into this unnaturally large ellipse, unleashing an inhuman, continuous screech that just echoes through the air, a sound that absolutely shatters the silence. Instantly, her hand reaches out. Cold, twisted fingers physically brush the narrator's cheek. The grip moves downward, tightening mercilessly around their throat. And then, with horrifying, impossible strength, the narrator is lifted entirely off the ground, suspended in midair, just gasping for breath. It is a completely inescapable, overwhelming assault. At this point, the narrator lets out a cry they can't even hear over that horrible screech, falls backward, hits their head hard on the ground, and their vision completely fills with stars. Everything just goes black. The very next thing the narrator knows, they're waking up in their own bed. It turns out, neighbors had found them passed out on the street and brought them home to their parents. The neighbors saw the very real physical bruises left on the narrator's neck and simply assumed someone had attempted a standard human assault. But think about what we just reviewed. Based on the impossible anatomy, those horrid grating noises, and that unnatural strength, was it really a human attacker or something else entirely? Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the final warning and the lingering trauma. Look, the physical bruises on the neck eventually faded away, but the screaming woman, she completely invaded the narrator's mind. We're talking about weeks of relentless nightmares, shattered sleep, and the echoing, haunting memory of that awful, inhuman screech. Because of this lingering, deep-seated trauma, the narrator actually leaves us with one explicit, desperate piece of advice. If you are ever walking alone and you see these 3 exact signs, a woman with black hair, a failing gait, and a dress that used to be white, that equation equals exactly one thing: run. You do not hesitate. You run as fast as you humanly can in the exact opposite direction. This whole account really forces us to look hard at our own instincts. I mean, we all think we know how we react in a moment of pure terror, right? We think we'd listen to that inner voice screaming at us to get away. But as we've seen in this explainer, Curiosity and that dangerous false sense of security can so easily override our primal alarms until it is entirely too late. So it leaves us with one deeply unsettling final thought. If you see her on your walk home today, will you be fast enough?
Do not come any closer.
There is no escape.